December 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. The Pacific Fleet's battleships lie twisted and sinking in the harbor mud. Japanese aircraft have achieved the most devastating surprise attack in American military history. But beneath the chaos, something else is happening. American submarines begin slipping out of Pearl Harbor within hours of the attack. These are the vessels the Navy brass never wanted. The career dead ends. The floating coffins that surface sailors mocked as pig boats for their foul conditions and low status. Nobody in Washington expects much from the submarine force. They comprise just 1.6% of the entire Navy. Their officers are the men the surface fleet passed over. Their crews endure conditions that would be condemned in any prison. And their primary weapon, the Mark 14 torpedo, is about to reveal itself as the most catastrophic engineering failure in American military history. What happens over the next 4 years will rewrite everything the Navy thought it knew about modern warfare. By 1945, those despised pig boats will have sunk more Japanese ships than every aircraft carrier, battleship, cruiser, and destroyer in the Pacific Fleet combined. They will strangle an empire. They will starve an industrial nation into collapse. They will accomplish what German U-boats failed to do to Britain in 2 world wars. And almost nobody will know about it. Because this is the silent service. And some silences are not voluntary. The pre-war American submarine force existed in a strange institutional twilight. Doctrinally, submarines were supposed to scout ahead of the battle fleet, finding the enemy so the battleships could engage in decisive surface action. It was an inherently subordinate role. The men who commanded submarines were not destined for flag rank. The conditions aboard were medieval. On a fleet submarine in the Pacific, 70 men shared 60 bunks in a practice called hot racking. 3 toilets, 2 sinks, 2 showers for the entire crew. Engine room temperatures exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit in tropical waters. Crewmen showered roughly every 10 days. Patrols averaged 75 days. The hazard pay was a paltry $5 to $20 per month. The surface Navy looked at these vessels and saw exactly what they expected to see. A backwater, a dumping ground, pig boats. Pearl Harbor changed everything, except the attitudes of the men who had always dismissed the submarine force. Within hours of the attack, American submarines pivoted from their doctrine of fleet scouting to unrestricted commerce warfare against Japan. It was a dramatic reversal. It was also the only offensive capability America had left in the Pacific. But there was a problem. The weapon that would define the submarine war, the Mark 14 torpedo, carried 3 independent defects that would take 21 months to identify and fix. And every step of the way, the Bureau of Ordnance would fight against the men dying to prove the problems existed. The first defect was depth control. The Mark 14 ran approximately 10 feet deeper than its setting. A torpedo set to run at 10 feet would pass harmlessly beneath a ship's keel at 20 feet. Submarine captains reported hit after hit with no explosions. Their boats had found targets, achieved firing solutions, launched torpedoes that ran straight and true, and watched them disappear without effect. The Bureau of Ordnance in Washington blamed the crews. Improper maintenance, inadequate training, sailor error. The torpedoes were fine. The men firing them were incompetent. On June 20, 1942, Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood, then commanding Southwest Pacific Submarines, conducted an unauthorized experiment. He purchased 500 feet of fishing net from a local Australian fisherman and had USS Skipjack fire torpedoes set at 10 feet through the net. The torpedoes punched through at 25 feet. Follow-up shots confirmed an average 11-foot depth error. The Bureau of Ordnance dismissed the methodology. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, had to intervene personally to force acknowledgement. The Bureau of Ordnance finally conceded on August 1, 1942, 8 months into the war. 8 months of submarine crews risking their lives with weapons that could not work. However, fixing the depth problem only revealed the second defect. The magnetic exploder, designed to detonate the warhead beneath an enemy hull for maximum damage, was firing prematurely. Torpedoes were exploding short of their targets before impact. On April 9, 1943, USS Tunney fired all 10 bow tubes at 3 Japanese aircraft carriers from just 880 yards. 7 apparent explosions followed. All were premature detonations. Only minor damage to the targets. 3 carriers escaped. The Bureau of Ordnance admitted in late April 1943 that the Mark VI magnetic exploder was susceptible to premature detonation. On June 24, 1943, Admiral Nimitz at Pacific Fleet Headquarters ordered all submarines to deactivate the magnetic feature. Rear Admiral Ralph Waldo Christie refused to comply. Christie, known as Mr. Torpedo for his personal development of the Mark VI exploder in the 1920s, commanded Southwest Pacific submarines under MacArthur, outside Nimitz's direct authority. He threatened court-martial for any skipper who deactivated the magnetic feature. He attributed every failure to crew error, not to his exploder. Christie continued forcing his submarines to use the defective magnetic exploder until early 1944, when Admiral Thomas Kinkaid finally overruled him. Christie wrote bitterly in his diary that the long, hard battle on the Mark VI magnetic feature had ended in defeat, and that he was forced to inactivate all magnetic exploders. He recorded that they were licked. He was protecting his career. His men were dying. But deactivating the magnetic exploder only revealed the third defect. The contact exploder crushed on impact. The decisive incident occurred on July 24, 1943. Lieutenant Commander Dan Daspit in USS Tenosa found the Japanese whale factory ship Tonan Maru No. 3 sailing unescorted. The tanker displaced over 19,000 tons. It was an unmissable target. Daspit's first salvo hit at oblique angles and detonated normally, stopping the tanker dead in the water. He then maneuvered to a textbook position, 875 yards, 90-degree track angle, a perfect firing solution. He fired 1 torpedo at a time. Each was heard to hit the target. None exploded. His patrol report repeated the same deadpan line 11 times. Fired torpedo. Hit. No apparent effect. After 11 consecutive duds at 90 degrees, Daspit made a career-defining decision. He saved his 16th and final torpedo. He brought it back to Pearl Harbor for analysis. Admiral Lockwood later wrote that he expected a torrent of cuss words damning him, the Bureau of Ordnance, the Newport Torpedo Station, and the base torpedo shop, and that he could not have blamed Daspit. 19,000-ton tankers do not grow on trees. Captain Charles Swede Mommsen devised the proof. On August 31, 1943, USS Muskellunge fired live war shots at the cliffs of Kahului Island in Hawaii. The third torpedo was a dud. Mommsen personally dove to retrieve the live unexploded 685-pound warhead. He disassembled it and found the firing pin had released but failed to strike the primer cap with sufficient force. The engineering team then conducted drop tests. Dummy warheads dropped from a crane at 90 feet onto steel plates replicated torpedo impact speed. 7 out of 10 exploders failed. The root cause was perversely elegant. At a 90-degree impact, an approximately 500 G deceleration created roughly 190 pounds of friction on the firing pin's guide rails. The spring simply could not overcome this friction. The more perfect the shot, the more likely it would fail. The fix came from an unexpected source. Pearl Harbor machinists fabricated lightweight aluminum firing pins from the propellers of Japanese aircraft shot down during the December 7th attack. By September 1943, reliable torpedoes finally reached the fleet. USS Barb departed on September 30, 1943, as the first submarine with a full load of working weapons. The war was 21 months old. If you are finding this deep dive into suppressed military history interesting, consider subscribing. It takes a moment and helps the channel continue uncovering stories like this one. Now, back to what happened when American submarines finally received torpedoes that worked. The Bureau of Ordnance leadership faced no consequences. Rear Admiral William Spike Blandy, chief of the Bureau of Ordnance from 1941 to December 1943, went on to command amphibious forces at Iwo Jima, oversee the Bikini atomic bomb tests, and become commander-in-chief of the Atlantic Fleet. He achieved 4-star rank. Nobody was court-martialed. Nobody was punished. The $10,000 per torpedo cost, roughly $160,000 in today's money, had made the Bureau of Ordnance unwilling to waste torpedoes on live fire tests. Only 2 live warshots had ever been fired at the Mark VI exploder before the war. Both were in 1926. But with working torpedoes, the submarine force transformed into the most lethal weapon in the Pacific. USS Tang, under Commander Richard O'Kane, compiled the all-time United States submarine record. In just 5 war patrols over 14 months, Tang sank 33 ships totaling over 116,000 tons. O'Kane's 3rd patrol in the Yellow Sea in June 1944 was the most productive single patrol of the entire war. 10 ships sunk, over 39,000 tons. On June 24, 1944, Tang attacked a convoy of 6 large ships guarded by 16 escorts. 4 ships sank in a single day. Tang's loss remains one of the war's most haunting stories. On October 25, 1944, in the Formosa Strait, during a night surface attack, the 24th and final torpedo broached and curved in a circular run. It struck Tang's own stern approximately 20 seconds after launch. The aft 3 compartments flooded instantly. Of approximately 87 crew, only 9 survived. 5 escaped from the forward torpedo room using the Momsen lung in the only operational use of that escape device during the entire war. O'Kane was captured, held at Ofuna interrogation camp, severely beaten, and nearly died before liberation. He received the Medal of Honor, 3 Navy Crosses, and 3 Silver Stars. USS Barb, under Captain Eugene Fluckey, achieved the war's most varied record. Barb sank 17 ships totaling over 96,000 tons. What makes Fluckey's achievement extraordinary is a verified claim that almost defies belief. No crewman was ever killed or wounded under his command. On January 22 and 23, 1945, Barb penetrated Namquan Harbor on the China coast. The submarine maneuvered in 5-fathom waters among 30 anchored enemy ships. Fluckey obtained 8 direct hits on 6 targets, then escaped at a submarine speed record of 23.5 knots through uncharted mined waters. He received the Medal of Honor. Barb's 12th and final patrol from June to August 1945 was extraordinary, even by Fluckey's standards. The submarine was equipped with experimental 5-inch rocket launchers, the only submarine of the war so armed. Barb fired 68 rockets at Japanese shore targets across 4 separate attacks, beginning the first submarine rocket attack in history. Then came the train mission. On the night of July 22nd and 23rd, 1945, 8 volunteers went ashore on Karafuto, southern Sakhalin. They were selected from unmarried men who were former Boy Scouts. The team buried a 55-pound demolition charge under railroad tracks, rigged to detonate under pressure. As they paddled back to Barb, a train detonated the charge. The locomotive wreckage flew 200 feet into the air. 16 cars derailed. This was the only United States ground combat operation on the Japanese home islands during the entire war. A submarine crew on Japanese soil, destroying enemy infrastructure. The capital ship kills tell an equally devastating story. Surface engagements between American and Japanese battleships occurred rarely and inconclusively. The 4 Iowa-class battleships, the most powerful American warships afloat, had only 1 surface engagement against enemy warships during the entire war. At Truk on February 16, 1944, USS Iowa and USS New Jersey intercepted fleeing Japanese ships and sank a light cruiser, a destroyer, an auxiliary cruiser, and a trawler. Perhaps 10,000 tons total. Submarines achieved something else entirely. On June 19, 1944, during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, 2 American submarines inflicted catastrophic damage on Japan's carrier force. At approximately 8:10 in the morning, USS Albacore, under Lieutenant Commander James Blanchard, fired 6 torpedoes at Taiho, Japan's newest and largest carrier. Taiho had been commissioned just 3.5 months earlier and was serving as Vice Admiral Ozawa's flagship. 1 torpedo struck. The hit appeared minor. Taiho lost only 1 knot of speed. Then, a catastrophic damage control error turned the ship into a floating bomb. A novice officer opened all ventilation systems to disperse fuel vapors from ruptured lines carrying unrefined Borneo crude oil. At approximately 3:30 in the afternoon, a massive explosion heaved up the flight deck. Taiho sank rapidly. Nearly 3 hours after Albacore's attack, USS Kavala, under Lieutenant Commander Herman Kostler, found the carrier Shokaku recovering aircraft. Kostler was on Kavala's maiden patrol. He fired all 6 bow tubes from 1,200 yards. 3 or 4 hit. Kavala survived 105 depth charges over 3 hours. Shokaku sank, with over 1,200 crew lost. One day, 2 fleet carriers, 2 submarines. On November 29, 1944, Commander Joseph N. Wright's USS Archerfish achieved what remains the largest warship ever sunk by a submarine. The target was Shinano, displacing 71,890 tons. Originally laid down as the 3rd Yamato-class battleship, Shinano had been converted to a carrier after Midway. American intelligence did not even know the ship existed until a reconnaissance flight spotted her on November 1st. She had been commissioned just 10 days before Archerfish found her. Enright fired 6 torpedoes. 4 hit. With an inexperienced crew and incomplete watertight integrity, Shinano capsized. 1,435 were killed, including Captain Toshio Abe. On November 21, 1944, USS Celian, under Lieutenant Commander Eli Reich, detected Admiral Kurita's force on radar at an extraordinary 44,000 yards. In a daring surface approach, Reich fired 6 bow torpedoes at Battleship Congo and 3 stern torpedoes at Battleship Nagato. 2 torpedoes hit Congo. The stern salvo missed Nagato, but destroyed the destroyer Urakazi with all hands. At 5:24 in the morning, Congo's magazines detonated in a tremendous explosion visible on the horizon. She sank with only 237 survivors out of over 1,400 crew. Congo was the only battleship sunk by a submarine in the open ocean during the entire war. The Japanese understood exactly what was happening to them. The Cabinet of Japan reported to the National Diet after the war. The greatest cause of defeat was the loss of shipping. Admiral Toyoda Suemu, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, told American interrogators, "Early in the war, I think the submarines were the part of the United States Navy which I considered the greatest threat." He added, "I think the greatest effect was felt after all by the lack of ships and consequent inability to bring material from the south." Rear Admiral Horiuchi Shigetada, Chief of Staff of the 1st Escort Fleet, was even blunter. Throughout the war, submarines were the most important constant menace. The numbers tell a devastating story. Japan's merchant fleet stood at approximately 6.4 million tons at the war's start. Despite building 3.9 million tons of new shipping during the war, losses totaled 8.9 million tons. Barely 1.5 million tons remained at surrender. Virtually all vessels of 1,000 tons or more were sunk or inoperative. Oil imports ceased entirely by April 1945. The fuel starvation cascaded into every domain. The fleet was forced to base at Singapore near the oil fields rather than the home islands. Pilot training was curtailed so severely that carrier aviators at the Philippine Sea were slaughtered in what Americans called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Fuel shortages directly spawned kamikaze tactics. Lieutenant Colonel Naomichi Jin admitted after the war, there was no prospect for victory in the air by the employment of orthodox methods. Suicide attack was the only sure and reliable attack by airmen whose training had been limited because of the shortage of fuel. Japanese anti-submarine warfare failure was systemic and doctrinal. Until April 10, 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy had no unit whose duty was to escort merchant vessels. The Grand Escort Command was not established until November 1943, nearly 2 years into the war. It requested 360 frigates. The Navy approved 40. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey, created specifically to evaluate air power, was forced to conclude the war against shipping was perhaps the most decisive single factor in the collapse of the Japanese economy. Consider the economics. An Iowa-class battleship cost approximately $100 million. A Gato-class submarine cost $2.85 million. One Iowa-class battleship cost as much as roughly 35 fleet submarines. All 4 Iowa-class ships, representing approximately $400 million in construction costs, achieved perhaps 10,000 tons of enemy shipping sunk in their designed role. The submarine force, comprising approximately 263 boats that conducted war patrols, sank 5.3 million tons. Fleet Admiral Halsey's post-war assessment is verified and exact. If I had to give credit to the instruments and machines that won us the war in the Pacific, I would rate them in this order: submarines first, radar second, planes third, bulldozers fourth. Submarines first. The weapon the Navy never wanted. The pig boats, the career dead ends, the forgotten men who endured the highest casualty rate of any American armed service branch. 22% of American submariners who served at sea died. 52 boats were lost. 3,506 names on the Eternal Patrol, the memorial roll of submariners who never came home. 7 submarine commanders received the Medal of Honor. Vice Admiral Lockwood, who fixed the torpedo crisis and transformed the submarine force, strictly controlled information released to the press throughout the war. The dangers of loose talk were tragically illustrated when Congressman Andrew May publicly revealed in June 1943 that Japanese depth charges were being set too shallow. Lockwood wrote that this revelation led to the loss of up to 10 submarines. The phrase "silent service" stuck, and so did the silence. The Joint Army-Navy Assessment Committee documented everything. The official JANAC report, published in February 1947, recorded the precise tonnages and ship counts. American submarines, comprising 1.6% of Navy personnel, sank 54.6% of all Japanese vessels by tonnage. They destroyed more than half of Japan's merchant fleet. They sank 4 fleet carriers, 4 escort carriers, 11 cruisers, 1 battleship, 38 destroyers, and 23 enemy submarines. The numbers are not disputed. They never have been. What happened in Washington was different. The same Navy establishment that had dismissed submarines before the war, that had allowed the torpedo scandal to continue for 21 months, that had promoted the men responsible for those failures, had no institutional interest in acknowledging how wrong they had been. The submarine force accomplished what German U-boats failed to do to Britain in 2 world wars. They strangled an island nation's supply lines to the point of total economic collapse. They did it with weapons that did not work for nearly 2 years. They did it while losing 1 in 5 of their men. They did it from vessels the Navy called pig boats. And when the war ended, the aircraft carriers got the headlines. The battleships got the surrender ceremony. The bombers got the histories. The submarines got silence. That was the silent service.